Thank you very much for giving me the floor, and I come without PowerPoints and unscripted, but I wrote down a few things on my iPad that I think might be very relevant today, both from Startup Europe Comes to Silicon Valley, which is our initiative in the Startup Europe Partnership, which was also in Silicon Valley a little bit after the MEPs, and also from the Startups Cooperation that we are undertaking. First of all, on some new things, very hot off the press, still coming up, and I still don't have the documents in text for you for reasons that will be very quickly comprehensible. First up, the Startups Communication, Startups to Scale-Ups, is coming on the 22nd of November. This is going to be co-signed, co-issued by Commissioners Oettinger, Moedas, and Bieńkowska. So we're hard.
Who's the first?
I think they're all on the same level.
Okay.
It started as an initiative of DG Grow, but it was drawing on our experience of Startup Europe in Connect. But now, as we should be, we in the Commission are bringing everything together, obviously also with other colleagues from DG Just, ECFIN, FISMA, and so on, who we're working with very happily in the intersurface consultation. What's going to be, I think, interesting there is the follow-up, obviously, and there, under the Startup Europe umbrella, we really do want to bring together a lot of the diverse support that we have and are going to have for Europe's startups, and most of all getting them to be scale-ups. Something that we see is, even if you keep Silicon Valley in, and even more if you take Silicon Valley out, the startup activity in Europe is huge now. The companies are being founded. The ecosystem for starting out is very good, but for scaling up and becoming a unicorn that we do have more and more, it is more difficult than in Silicon Valley. So we're hoping with this set of initiatives, which is in response to the Scale-Ups Manifesto coming from the community, that we will be moving forward with the Commission, working with the European Parliament, the member states, and other stakeholders, obviously. Something else that's coming up very soon, it's for a sector, but it's relevant, and it's the Roundtable of European Bank CEOs with Commissioner Dombrovskis and with Commissioner Oettinger. And there, one of the things that's going to be emphasized on Monday as one of the results of the recommendations coming from the CEOs on digitalizing banking to the Commission, and the Commission's response is bringing together the fintechs and the banks, so the startup and corporate collaboration. Also, in this aforementioned communication, one thing that we're also trying to put in there is not just the corporates, but collaboration with the mid-caps, really making sure that the whole business ecosystem of Europe works together, whether it's for mergers and acquisitions or collaboration in working together. Now, looking at Startup Europe Comes to Silicon Valley, what did we do there? We had a European Innovation Day, which was the meeting of European startups and scale-ups with the venture capitalist Tim Draper, among others, but also European networking. You had the people who are in Silicon Valley, are Spanish, Estonian, German, etc., colleagues who are working there, coming together and meeting the startups from Europe who want to scale into the market of the United States after having been successful in Europe. How did we choose the startups and scale-ups that were going? Startup Europe did an open call, and 15 of the best were chosen. So we were also showcasing and working to open markets for some of our soon-to-be, hopefully, very successful scale-ups. There were also meetings afterwards for these 15 chosen startups and also others at various points with venture capitalists from the U.S., lawyers who were explaining some of the intricacies of the U.S. market. Interestingly, almost all the lawyers were Europeans, though they were working in U.S. law firms. They were Swedish and Polish, etc. With mentors, there were also meetings at Uber, Google, Microsoft, seeing again what we can learn from that ecosystem. I mean, something that is very interesting there and that is a takeaway, and it's not so easy to copy here, especially when we look European-wide, because this is one thing we at the Commission and the Parliament should try to be doing, is that they really benefit from the concentration of talent and investors. You hear again and again, we go down to this pub or we go down to this bar, and there you can meet the VCs, there you can meet the lawyers who know how how to make the agreements with the VCs. You know how find people who can do the immigration papers for bringing in talent from somewhere else, and this might be all around a craft beer or something like that. So I mean that's something interesting. What can we do in Europe to try to copy that? Obviously, we have ecosystems that are successful in Europe. Still London, Paris, Berlin, Tallinn, others. But we can also work on creating a better ecosystem across Europe, and the digital single market helps in this. It's obviously the physical contact, the talking is still important, even in the digital revolution of Silicon Valley. You see very many of the important meetings have even had their first contact by people being in the same room, in the same networking, in the same coffee house or bar. But we have steps forward, one of which is the Fund of Funds, which has just been announced, really bringing together a push for European venture capital. Also, we're looking at a way that we can have the regulator just down the street effect of the regulatory sandbox, the discussion on how new business models fit in to regulatory frameworks that didn't prohibit that, but didn't perceive, for instance, a disintermediated model, a distributed model in finance or in relation to, let's say, the automated car or the connected car. So also looking at ways that platforms can make this also available to startups and scale-ups anywhere in Europe. And this is something that we might see as well in the startups communication, though we'll only be able to signal that when it's published. Also, the Startup Europe networking of ecosystems is something that's very important. So the energy that we have in Berlin in certain sectors, the energy that we have in Stockholm and others, issues that we have in some of our startup, very much booming ecosystems with affordable housing and so on, might benefit from being able to link up to startups and scale-ups that are in Warsaw or other places where it's, even more affordable if the startup starts to scale beyond the talent pool that they have and cannot easily bring people in. And I mean, finally on this point, completing the digital single market. We hear this again and again from our own startups and scale-ups. While in Silicon Valley we had a policy hack on the EU and US ecosystems with just all kinds of people from both sides of the Atlantic, and I guess we go the other direction over the Pacific. And this is really one of the things that we're missing. You get again and again from some European startups that we launched in country X in Europe, and actually it's been just as easy to go to the United States as to go to France or to Germany or to Austria, that it's, as great an investment in time to work within the single market to another country as it is to go to a market of hundreds of millions of people, which is maybe a little less attractive right now, but we'll see what happens in the end with the elections there as well. Another takeaway which is very interesting, and I think that we should probably think about emulating, also for us, the policymakers who were along. We met with people from Department of Commerce, State Department, and so on, people coming over from Washington from anti-terrorism and digital. And they have a permanent State Department envoy, Ministry of Foreign Affairs envoy, to Silicon Valley from the U.S. State Department to make sure that there is an open line constantly between the tech community and the tech companies and U.S. foreign affairs. And I mean, this is not something that we've ignored. I know in the External Action Service, also in places like Connect and in the Commission, we have digital linked to our external policies, but they have a permanent person in place talking to the tech companies, participating in events daily, going to the same coffee houses and bars, and this seemed to be an interesting innovation. Something else which came up that was very striking was control of data. We often hear that, the Europeans are very special on this. For us, you can say maybe it's more of a case of privacy and security, but I was hearing again and again, and from some of the very well-funded startups by VCs in Silicon Valley, that control of data is one of the big new business models, but for monetization of data. how can the U.S. consumer make money off of his or her data and not have the platforms make money off of it? So maybe a little bit of a different ideology, more consumerist, but really some very well-funded startups coming up and were telling us within these kinds of brainstormings that this is our model. Real consent, real control of data. Don't let the data go freely everywhere. So, I mean, in some ways, perhaps our business models don't differ. Perhaps the ideology, whether it's human rights, fundamental rights, or it's commerce, might differ a little bit, but we might see a certain convergence there, and this is something to watch, I think, very closely. Finally, in my task that I will be leaving for, unfortunately, for the European Payments Federation in a few minutes to speak there, I'm in the fintech context. I was meeting with companies individually there, and some of the interesting takeaways that I got there was they were saying that standards are very important for them scaling into Europe, and that they think this is an important issue also for completion of the DSM, because in various ways we don't necessarily want to have all the biggest companies come in here, and take over the market, but I mean the things that are good for having a single market here are also good for our enterprises, and of course we're an open market. The other thing that was very interesting, there was a lot of talk about the virtual currencies, and generally a lot of skepticism, which I think a lot of us would share here, that a virtual currency like Bitcoin would take over as a currency in and of its own right, but a lot of interest in virtual currencies for micropayments, for the 0.00001 for utilizing something, and that this might eventually be the killer app for Bitcoin or Ethereum or something else, a very frictionless and, cheap way to pay for instance, copyrighted content, for other issues, the monetization of the data by the U.S. consumer, which I just brought up. So there's some interesting things to watch there a little bit in the fintech space. And with that, that was my introduction to what we're doing and my takeaways.
Thank you.